And a good evening to you, young psychology students. Mr. McIntyre here, going to be giving you our first actual lesson, and our new topic is conditioning, as you can see right there. Understanding and managing behavior. This is all about how we learn. Sometimes more like how we learn to do things, how we learn new behaviors, how we can change people's behaviors. Some of the kind of conditioning that we're going to talk about is conditioning that you are an active participant in, meaning what's in it for me? Is the reward good enough for me to do the behavior? And some of the conditioning that we're going to talk about is more subconscious. It is reflexive behavior, something that triggers you when your phone goes off or something. You reflexively reach for it. So some learning we're an active part in, some learning we are doing kind of just reflexively. So we're going to dig into that today. Okay, here's the agenda that we're going to cover today, March 30th, 2020. We're going to try as best we can to explain the process of learning. We are going to do the thing that we did at the beginning of the year where we pick a behavior and try to get somebody to do that thing through a series of reinforcements. Oh, good job! Or boo, further away. And we're going to watch one of my favorite shows of all time, The Office, where Jim trains Dwight. And I am hopefully today, through the principles of classical conditioning, going to be able to train each and every one of you to fear the Kardashian clan, in particular, Kim. Also going to talk to you about two all-time classic experiments. One, Ivan Pavlov's dog experiment with the bell and the salivation, and the other, an ethical experiment by today's standards, the Little Albert experiment. And so once we've done all of that, then I'm going to turn you guys loose to do two creations of your own. One, a classical conditioning experiment, and the other, the same kind of thing that we did in class really early at the beginning of the year. And I've got a sample to show you on that one too. Okay, so let's start right here and have you guys do a little brainstorming to start with. I want you to think about what you want to get somebody to do. You're going to attempt to train, while maintaining proper social distance, of course, a family member or a friend. So choose a silly behavior. Do we want somebody to dance? Do we want them to sing? Do we want them to say something very specific to us? Do we want them to turn on a particular TV show? Do we want them to go exercise? What do we want them to do? And you need to choose the person that you want to participate in the game with you. And this is the person that we're gonna try to applaud or reinforce with candy or something toward a particular behavior, or boo them when they head toward the wrong behavior. So why don't you pause right now and just do a quick brainstorm on it. Go ahead, pause. Okay. So some of you did, some of you didn't. Let's carry on. I want you to listen to this song, and I want you to tell me what you think of. Can you hear that? You thinking of anything yet? Oh, maybe that does it. Jot it down in your notes. Have your notes out. Ah, I bet that was enough. What is it? Oh! This is Jaws. Right? This is Jaws. What do we think of when we think of Jaws? We know when we hear that music that there is impending doom, that danger is near, that death is coming. Anytime we hear that music, we have a trigger in our brain that knows that is what to expect. There are lots of things like this in our lives that as soon as we hear a particular stimuli, smell a particular stimuli, feel a particular stimuli, that we have an immediate and reflexive trigger, a memory, something that we have paired with that. Every time I watch a horror movie, somebody goes off to die, and when they go off to die, they almost always say, "Don't worry." You know what they said, don't you? I am making popcorn, but I'm doing a recording right now. Don't worry, I'll be right back. And that is the death sentence in all horror movies. So go ahead and pause again and jot down some other examples of famous phrases or songs or scores or other things from your own lives that kind of have an instinctive trigger for you. Pause. All right, next up, we're going to take a look at a video from my favorite comedy, probably of all time. That is The Office. And so I want you to be thinking about how Jim was able to train Dwight. Great episode, Phyllis's wedding.
Another file. I have to reboot again. Hey, Dwight, do you want an Altoid? What do you think? In school, we learned about this scientist who trained dogs to salivate at the sound of a bell
Pavlov.
by feeding them whenever a bell rang. So for the past couple of weeks, I've been conducting a similar experiment. Dwight, one Altoid. Okay. Altoid? Sure. And Dwight? Feed 3? Yes. What are you doing? What?
I don't know. My mouth tastes so bad all of a sudden.
Classic. All right, so how did Jim train Dwight? Did Dwight know that he was being trained? No, he didn't. Whoa. Can't do that. So Jim knew about classical conditioning. Jim knew. Capri, please stop. Jim knew. Oh, kids. There they are. Jim knew about Ivan Pavlov's classical conditioning experiment, the most famous one of all time, which of course is with the dogs and the salivation. And so he was able to take the principles of Pavlov's dogs and to apply them in a humorous cold opening for The Office. So we're going to have to do that a little bit later on as well. Let's go ahead and pull this thing back up. Okay, so if you haven't gotten your notebooks out yet, maybe now is the time to do that. Obviously, you can pause this at any point and you can review. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through the content just so that this video doesn't end up dragging on too long. But largely what we're going to be talking about today is classical conditioning. And at the core is the question, like, what is learning? Not in the classic sense that you guys are thinking, but how do we train people to behave in a particular way? Let's take a look. All right, so learning is defined as a relatively permanent change in behavior due to experience. That's not the kind of definition that we would normally expect to see with learning. And so again, it is the process of learning behavior that our psychology book is talking to us about. We've got popcorn in the background. Wonderful. Learning comes from a couple of different tactics. One of the tactics is reinforcement. Reinforcement is an event that increases the probability that a particular response will occur. A response is behavior. So how do I get somebody's behavior to occur more regularly? Reinforce it. It is roughly the same as reward. So reward a behavior, and that person will do it again. Capri, nice job, babe. All right.
What'd you say? What'd you say? What'd you say?
I was rewarding you for being just a really nice kid. Okay. However, don't come back over here while I'm doing this, otherwise I'll punish you severely.
Look who I just found in the floor.
There is a rabbit. Good grief. Okay. What are we doing
It's
here?
Bun Bun.
My gosh.
Look, he's so cute.
Punishment is coming for all McIntyre family members, including this rabbit.
Oh,
Get
he's
this thing
so
away
sweet.
from me. No, he's not sweet at all. Okay, ridiculous. All right, so I could reinforce someone to get to a particular behavior. And the other thing that I might be able to do is I could punish someone toward a behavior, or I guess maybe away from a behavior is better to say. So punishment decreases a response's recurrence. If I don't want someone to do a behavior again, I punish that person when they do the behavior. Okay, so those are the two biggies. Reinforcement, punishment. Some work better for others. Okay, seriously. Come again, and you shall receive a second spanking.
Oh, good night.
Oh, boy. So here are a couple of additional things. I might have to get rid of myself here in a second. I'm kind of obscuring these notes. Events that come before a behavior are called antecedents. Well, what comes before? What is the situation before you do that behavior? Events that follow a behavior are called consequences. So antecedent, what comes before, behavior, and then what comes after? Consequences. A, B, C. Simple as ABC. All right, and consequences has an unusual connotation most of the time in our world today. It almost always is negative, but in psychology, a consequence is just an effect. Consequences can be both good and or bad. All right. Now let's dig in a little bit closer here on specifically classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is the kind of training that people don't actually know they're getting. This is happening instinctively. It is happening reflexively.
Is it done yet?
The popcorn is done. Yeah. All right. Big popcorn fiends here at the McIntyre house. Let's take a look at some of the key terminology here that you guys are going to be putting to use in your own experiments. Classical conditioning is a form of learning in which a reflex response is associated with a stimuli. So an automatic behavior is triggered by a stimuli. An automatic behavior is triggered by a song. An automatic behavior is triggered by a scream. An automatic behavior is triggered by being scared. An automatic behavior is triggered by a smell of grandmother's cookies. So classical conditioning begins with a reflex, an automatic response to a stimulus, a blink, a scream, ah! Salivation, I can't help that. Flinching, if someone punches at me, I may flinch. You saw Bun Bun here just a few minutes ago, and Bun attacks viciously sometimes, just like in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and I have learned to flinch when Bun Bun is near my face. And, of course, the other thing. No! Kim Kardashian. So the reflex is then paired with a stimuli until it becomes automatic. Okay. Oh! Kim Kardashian. All right, here are some of the elements of classical conditioning. You've got an unconditioned stimulus, which is going to be designated as a US. And the unconditioned stimulus triggers an unlearned response. It triggers a natural reaction, a natural behavior, a reflexive behavior, something that automatically elicits a response. is an unconditioned stimulus? My scream. I've been screaming. Hopefully when I've been screaming, you guys have been taken aback a little bit by my screaming. And especially the first time that I screamed, you probably flinched or did something that would be very, very natural to do when someone screams. You didn't think, Mr. McIntyre is screaming, I should probably do something about it. You just instinctively responded or reflexively responded when I screamed. No! Kim Kardashian. There's an unconditioned response as well. So an unlearned reflex, which is elicited by the unconditioned stimulus. Again, the unconditioned stimulus is the scream, and you guys just had some sort of natural response to my scream. Probably you flinched, you yelped, yep. You recoiled away from the screen because it was scary. Those would be your natural responses, your unconditioned or untrained responses. Kim Kardashian. A neutral stimulus, the NS, does not naturally evoke a response. First time I put a picture of Kim Kardashian up here, you might be a little bit surprised to see Kim in our psychology slideshow, but a photo of Kim does not elicit a response from most of you. Probably she is just kind of a part of everyday life, a relatively neutral stimuli. You don't do much when you see pics of Kim, clothed pics of Kim. Kim Kardashian. Conditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus is what we're trying to do. We're trying to evoke a response after pairing it with an unconditioned stimulus. So again, the unconditioned stimulus earlier, the very first thing, is a scream. You're naturally flinching, yelping, recoiling. You're doing something. Oh boy, hey buddy. There we go. Say goodbye.
Good night, Atlas.
Good night, Atlas. So the unconditioned stimulus is this scream. I want to take something that you don't normally have a negative reaction to, picture of Kim Kardashian, and I want to pair it with a scream. I want to pair this neutral stimulus with the natural unconditioned stimulus of a scream. Kim plus scream. Paired together. You've got Kim and scream, and they are inextricably linked. Hopefully, if we do this enough times, over and over, that I will be conditioning you to fear a new stimulus. Here she comes. Ow! I'm scaring myself. And what ultimately I am hoping for, what classical conditioning is attempting to do, I am attempting to modify your behavior here in some way. I'm attempting to create something that did not exist. And if we weren't talking about what I was doing, you would be kind of just swept along in this process of learning without really being a part of it. I have probably, to some extent, conditioned you at this point to respond to a picture of Kim Kardashian. You have a new learned response to pictures of Kim Kardashian. So you're conditioned or you're trained. I've trained you to behave in a particular way when you see this new conditioned stimulus photo of Kim Kardashian. Here she comes. Some of you just stared, I'm sure. Some of you didn't flinch. Some of you did not recoil. And some of you did not even yelp. But a couple of you did. And I trained you. I just trained you like you're my pet. Like one of my many, many pets that I have. Okay. Or my children. Or my wife. All right. So let's take a look at this step-by-step guide. Hey, buddy. That's Alaska. Alaska cannot stop from hairball vomiting every day at this point. We're going to have to do something to train this cat to stop throwing up hairballs all over our comforters.
He's so old, though.
He is so old.
He's a good boy.
Maybe we'll use this conditioning experiment here to figure out ways to train our children or our pets, or maybe even my wife to stop interrupting me when I'm trying to do a lesson. We'll take a poll later on. What should her punishment be? All right, let's go on here. You're going to see this several times. I'm going to place one of these in classroom for you guys to work through, and then also to brainstorm and create using this classical conditioning template. Okay, so thinking again about Kim. Before conditioning, what was the unconditioned stimulus? What was the natural thing that we all respond to? What is it? Yes, it's the scream. That's right. We're all naturally going to respond when someone's screaming, whether we're babies or whether we're old people. People naturally respond to that stimulus, and the natural response to the stimulus might be flinching, yelping, recoiling. All right. Before conditioning, our neutral stimulus was Kim. What was our unconditioned response to Kim? What was our response to a neutral stimulus? Hey, guys, here's Kim Kardashian. Nothing. That's right. All right, so then there is a process called acquisition, which is what's represented here as during conditioning. So during the process of training or conditioning, we are pairing Kim, the neutral stimulus, and we're pairing the scream. Kim and the scream. Okay? So pair it. And the unconditioned response, because there's a scream involved, is a flinch. That's right. And so to get this to effectively actually sink its teeth into somebody, you've got to do this over and over and over again before someone actually picks up a new behavior. And so while I only have it listed twice here, you need to do that a whole lot more if you actually want to train your dog. Or have you ever tried training a cat? Or a child? Or a wife? All right. Scream plus Kim, flinching. Scream plus Kim, flinching. Scream plus Kim, flinching. Scream plus Kim, flinching. Over and over and over. And then after you have trained, you have still the old unconditional stimulus, the scream. That scream still makes you flinch, but now is where the magic happens. You have now conditioned a new stimulus. Kim. And now Kim, and maybe even the entire Kardashian clan, and we'll throw the Jenners in for good measure. Trust me, that says flinch. Congratulations. You now know how to classically condition. Let's try the single most famous example of this. This is the classic example of classical conditioning. I'm going to show you real quickly a brief video. It's about 3 minutes long, and it's going to give you a little bit. It's going to show you a dramatized version of Pavlov's dog experiment. Check it out. And I'm going to depart for a minute while you watch this.
Pavlov's aim was to discover what caused saliva to flow. He rerouted the salivary ducts to the outside of his dog's cheek so that he could collect and measure the spittle. Perhaps he thought the production of saliva might be the result of a fixed nervous reflex, like a knee jerk.
Yes, minut, 2.5 sekundy.
After taking many measurements of spittle, he confirmed that the dogs drooled automatically when their tongues touched food. He called the response the salivation reflex.
4,5. Хорошая собачка. Я предлагаю поменять собаку.
But his work started to run into trouble. As his dogs became familiar with the experimental routine, they started to fill their cheek tubes before Pavlov had a chance to stimulate their tongues. The dogs were learning to anticipate food. Pavlov tried a new technique. He erected screens so that the dogs couldn't see what was going on. Before passing meat through the hatch, he introduced a stimulus that was totally unrelated to feeding. A ticking metronome. At first, the dog dripped saliva into its cheek tube only when the food appeared. But after a number of trials, the dog began to connect the ticking with the arrival of meat. Soon, the sound alone made the dog drool. Eventually, the dog salivated as much to the ticking itself as it did originally to the presentation of food.
Полная. Идите сюда. Что я говорил?
He called this new response the conditioned reflex.
Пока.
Whatever the stimulus, his dogs could soon be conditioned to produce saliva. Pavlov believed that he had discovered how animals learned, even in the wild.
Okay. Well, that was exciting stuff. The old saliva tube. Bet you didn't expect to hear that in the psychology lecture today. Just got some hot tea this evening. Let's get out of there. Oh, it's still in there. Oh, okay. So let's do one more round of practice on this, and then I'm going to turn you loose. Okay. Here we go. This is Pavlov's dog. Okay. So I'm going to go quicker. You guys pause it if you want to practice on your own in advance and check your answers with me. Go ahead and pause, see if you can fill this out, and then I will run through the answers right here, right now. Here we go. So before conditioning, the unconditioned stimulus for a dog is meat. And the unconditioned response of a dog, of course, salivation. Before conditioning, the neutral stimulus, and he used a variety of different things here, but we're going to use the classic bell. And the unconditioned response to the bell, dogs and bells, no natural response there, nothing. So again, during this long process of acquisition, where he's pairing these two things together, bell and meat, we get an unconditioned response because there is meat, salivation. Bell and meat equals salivation. After conditioning, meat still and will always, for dogs and carnivores like me, yield salivation. And then after conditioning, of course, this is the whole thing. The conditioned stimulus, now a bell, will also yield, that says salivation. Bell, salivation. Crazy. And this is so widely applicable for us. You can do this to your pets, and many of you already have. You can train your brothers and sisters. You can train your teachers. You can train your parents, and they will never know. Okay, so I am going to turn you guys loose on an assignment that I'll post on Classroom. It's on this most unethical of these classical conditioning experiments called Little Albert, and that won't take you very long at all. That's on Classroom, as will be these next reminders to do these next two things as well, both of which should be fun, and you'll have time to complete them this week. Okay, here is the first one. I'm going to get rid of myself here. How do I do that? Oh, let's do that. All right. So I showed you this earlier. I did this with Mrs. McIntyre, and I will post it on Classroom as well so that you'll have a sample. I want you to attempt to train a family member or a friend who is willing to put up with your shenanigans. 1, choose a silly behavior and choose a silly person. Okay, got to have a behavior, and you've got to have a person, and the person needs to be a willing participant, and the person is going to be guided by your reinforcement and or by your punishment. So try to get them to do your behavior by rewarding them with food and or applause, or punishing them maybe with booze, and make sure that you record this and we'll get it posted on Classroom or another application, whatever makes the most sense, and you'll see how to do that on Classroom when I post this. And the other assignment that I want you to do this week is a classical conditioning experiment. This one's going to be a little bit more difficult. I want you to attempt to train a family member or friend without them knowing it. Now, that's the important part of classical conditioning, without them knowing it. So you're going to use the same classical conditioning chart that we used for Kim, and that we used for Pavlov, and that we used for little Albert. And having worked through that 3 times, twice with me, once on your own, you should have a general familiarity with it at this point. And I would like for you to, in your notes, to just kind of draw that chart out, use that terminology, and create a scenario, a conditioning experiment, where you are going to pair a neutral stimulus with a stimulus that's going to naturally evoke a response. So what you're shooting for here is to get a stimuli that wouldn't normally create a reaction, to create a reaction. Get a stimuli to trigger a reflexive action in your subject. So my experiment with Kim is an example of this. I used a scream with Kim, and I hopefully was able to some degree, train you to fear pictures of Kim, because you just got sick of listening to the scream. So even if that's all I did, I still made you behave in a way where you dreaded probably going to the Kim screen because you didn't want to listen to me yelp. All right. So do something similar to that. Use a ringtone. Use a particular phrase. I don't want to tell you to inflict pain upon a family member, but a classic experiment done before, flicking of the ear, things of that nature. Anytime you're like, hey, buddy, how you today? Flick in the ear. Hey, buddy, how you today? Flick him in the ear. Hey, buddy, how are you today? Flick him in the ear. Hey, buddy, how are you today? Flick him in the ear. And eventually, when you greet your little brother with, hey, buddy, how are you doing today? Your little brother is going to flinch. All right. That's all I'm looking for. Please don't do that one. Come up with something creative and on your own. Thank you. All right, guys, check Classroom out. I'll be looking forward to seeing some of your videos come across. Enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. I'll be posting again at some point, either on Wednesday or Thursday of this week. So look forward to your next edition of Conditioning. Have a good day.